The call came through at 2:47 a.m., dragging Dr. Elena Vasquez from a dream about mismatched chromosomes. She fumbled for her phone in the darkness of her Seattle apartment, squinting at the unfamiliar Oregon area code. Dr. Vasquez, this is Ranger Mitchell from the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. We have a situation. The Regional Wildlife Center needs a comparative anatomist. Now. Elena sat up, fully awake. Rangers didn't use words like situation for routine wildlife incidents. What kind of specimen? A pause. One that doesn't match anything in our databases. Living, large primate, injured in a wildfire evacuation route. The vet says, you need to see this yourself. 2 hours later, Elena's Subaru wound through pre-dawn fog along the Lewis River, Douglas firs rising like cathedral pillars on either side. The August wildfires had retreated north after a week of rain, but smoke still hazarded the valleys, turning sunrise into an apocalyptic orange smear. Her emergency kit rattled in the back. Calipers, measurement tools, specimen jars, her portable digital scanner. 15 years of studying primate skeletal morphology had prepared her for many things. The ranger's tone suggested this wouldn't be one of them. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center occupied a converted Forest Service station 20 miles from any town. Elena parked beside 2 ranger trucks and a veterinary van. Through the building's window, she saw movement. People in medical scrubs, the bright surgical lights of an improvised operating theater. Ranger Mitchell met her at the door, a weathered man in his 50s with soot on his uniform. Appreciate you coming. We've maintained containment. 7 people have seen it, all signed NDAs. NDAs for wildlife rescue? You'll understand. He handed her a surgical mask and gloves. Dr. Reeves is stabilizing now. The animal's sedated but responsive to pain stimuli. We have maybe 2 hours before Federal Wildlife Services arrive, and once they do, he trailed off meaningfully. The examination room smelled of antiseptic and something else, a sharp, musky odor like damp earth and cedar. Eleanor stepped inside and stopped. On the examination table lay something that rewrote everything she knew. The creature measured at least 7.5 feet, its body covered in russet brown hair, matted with ash and blood. But it was the face that arrested her. The pronounced brow ridge, the flat nose, the way the jaw structure hinted at both ape and something heartbreakingly familiar. Its right leg bore severe burns, the flesh blistered and weeping. Dr. Reeves, a veterinarian Eleanor vaguely recognized from a wildlife conference, worked carefully to debride the wounds. Vitals are stable, Reeves said without looking up. Temperature 97.8, heart rate 52, respiration 14. Sedation is holding, but we've had to be conservative. I have no dosing guidelines for this. She gestured helplessly at the body. Skeletal structure is confounding. The pelvis suggests bipedalism. The foot architecture is unlike any great ape, and the cranial capacity. She finally met Elena's eyes. I need you to tell me this is a known species. Please. Elena approached slowly, her scientific training warring with profound disquiet. She'd seen gorillas, orangutans, chimps, had measured their bones, traced their evolutionary pathways. This was none of those. She began with the hands, 5 fingers, opposable thumb, but the proportions were different from human or ape. The palm was broader, the fingertips squared. She lifted one massive hand gently, it must have weighed 5 pounds, and examined the dermal ridges. Fingerprints, complex whorls and arches. Jesus, she whispered. Yeah. Reeves returned to the wound care. Now check the feet. The feet were miracles of biomechanical engineering. Human-like in structure with a proper arch, but massively reinforced. The heel bone was twice the size of a human's. The toe bones splayed for balance, built for endurance walking and running, for navigating rough terrain. Elena's mind raced through comparative anatomy. Australopithecus, Homo erectus, the evolutionary march toward modern human feet. This fit somewhere in that progression, but diverged in ways she couldn't immediately parse. She moved to the skull, measuring with experienced fingers. Pronounced supraorbital ridge, yes, but the frontal bone showed expansion for a prefrontal cortex. The sagittal crest was modest, suggesting less massive jaw muscles than gorillas, more reliance on cognitive processing. The foramen magnum, the hole where the spine enters the skull, was positioned for upright posture. "I need X-rays," Elena said. "Full skeletal survey and tissue samples, hair, blood, skin, anything you can spare." "Already collected." Reeves indicated a cold storage unit. 6 vials of blood, tissue biopsies from undamaged skin, hair samples from 3 body regions. "The ranger station has a portable X-ray machine for wildlife documentation. We've already done preliminary imaging." Reeves pulled up digital images on a laptop. Elena's breath caught. The skeleton was a mosaic. The spine showed reduced lumbar vertebrae, 5 instead of the human typical 6, with massive processes for powerful back muscles. The pelvis was broad and basin-like for bipedalism, but reinforced in ways human pelves weren't. The femur showed the angled shaft of a habitual biped, but with cortical bone thickness, suggesting massive weight-bearing. Then Elena noticed the thorax. The ribs. They're funnel-shaped, and the sternum is flattened and elongated, like Neanderthals or Heidelbergensis, Reeves finished. The chest cavity is huge. I estimate lung capacity 50% greater than a human male of equivalent size. Elena zoomed in on the hand bones. The thumb's articulation showed a human-like precision grip, but the phalanges were robust, built for both power and dexterity. These hands could manipulate tools, could create, could communicate. A low sound interrupted her analysis, a vocalization from the sedated creature. Both women froze. It was a rumbling moan, rising and falling with breath, almost musical in its modulation. Definitely not human, but not entirely animal either. "That's the 3rd time," Reeves murmured, "always in sequences, like it's trying to talk." Elena finished. They stared at each other over the body of the impossible. "We have to document everything," Elena said finally. "Full morphological analysis. But if the feds take this to some black site facility, we lose any chance of understanding what this is on ethical terms." She paused, weighing her words. "This is a person, a different kind of person." "That's what I thought," Reeves said quietly. "But I'm a veterinarian. I needed someone who studies this for a living to confirm I wasn't crazy." Eleanor looked down at the creature. No, the individual before her. The burns would heal, given proper care. But what then? Captivity, dissection, years in some sterile research facility while scientists publish papers about Subject A1? Or something else? Something unprecedented? How long until the feds arrive? 2 hours, maybe 3 if the roads are slow. Eleanor made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Then we work fast. Full documentation, full medical care. But we also find a way to communicate. If this individual is cognizant, if they have language or symbolic thought, we need to establish that before anyone else gets here. She met Reeves's eyes. "And we need to make a choice about what gets revealed and what stays protected." Reeves nodded slowly. "There could be more. A population. If we expose this one, we might destroy them all," Elena finished. "So we work carefully. We work ethically. And we let this person help decide their own fate if we can figure out how to ask." D. They began in earnest then, racing against time and protocol. Elena measured and documented, her calipers moving precisely over bone landmarks, her notes filling page after page. Femoral length, 68 centimeters. Humeral length, 42 centimeters. Cranial capacity estimated at 1,800 cubic centimeters, well within the range of modern humans, exceeding Neanderthals. The teeth told stories. Worn molars suggested a diet of tough vegetation, seeds, possibly roots. But the canines were small, reduced, not the fighting teeth of gorillas, but the versatile teeth of an omnivore. The wear patterns suggested tool use, perhaps for processing food. No cavities, which meant limited processed sugars. A subsistence lifestyle. As Elena worked, she watched for signs of consciousness returning. The sedation was carefully balanced, enough to prevent pain and thrashing, light enough to maintain breathing and circulation. Around 9 a.m., as dawn light finally penetrated the smoke outside, the creature's eyes flickered open. Elena's heart hammered. The eyes were dark brown, almost black, with prominent white sclera. They moved independently at first, disoriented, then focused, fixed on Elena. Intelligence looked back at her. "Hey," she said softly, keeping her voice gentle. "You're safe. You were hurt. We're helping." The eyes tracked her face, moved to Reeves, then to the medical equipment. A cognitive assessment happening in real time. The creature's chest rose and fell, breath quickening, fear, evaluation. Elena slowly raised her hands, palms out. Universal primate signal. I mean no harm. The creature stared at her hands. Then, with visible effort, it lifted one massive hand from the table. Trembling slightly from the sedation, it mirrored her gesture. Palm out. "Oh my God," Reeves breathed. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. This wasn't instinct. This was communication. This was intention. She touched her chest. "Elena." The creature watched. Its mouth moved, shaping syllables it couldn't quite produce. The vocal anatomy was different, the larynx positioned differently. But the attempt was clear. Elena tried again, simpler. She pointed at herself, waited. The creature lowered its hand slowly, touched its own chest with one finger. The gesture was unmistakable. "Me. Self. Yes," Elena whispered. "You. You're you. What do you call yourself?" she wanted to ask. "Where are your people? How long have you been here, living in the margins while we built cities and never knew?" But those questions would take time, would take trust, would take a language they didn't yet share. The creature's eyes closed again, exhaustion or sedation pulling it back under. But in that brief exchange, everything had changed. Ranger Mitchell appeared at the door. "Federal Wildlife Services just called. They're 40 minutes out. The regional director is with them, and they're bringing containment equipment." Elena looked at the samples they'd collected, the measurements she'd recorded. Evidence enough to establish something extraordinary, not enough to pinpoint a population or habitat. She thought of the vast forests of the Pacific Northwest, millions of acres of old growth, river valleys, high mountain meadows, places humans rarely went. Places a small population could hide, generation after generation, if they were smart and careful and very lucky. "Here's what we tell them," Elena said. "Unknown primate species, possibly a relict population, critically endangered based on the lack of any previous documentation. We provide full medical records and morphological data, but specimen location remains vague. Found near a fire evacuation route could mean anywhere in 100 square miles. And we advocate for in situ conservation rather than captive research." "They won't go for that," Mitchell said. "Maybe not, but we plant the seed, and we make it clear that this individual deserves ethical consideration." He looked down at the sleeping form. "Meanwhile, we keep collecting data, because the more we understand, the better we can protect." Reeves carefully covered the creature with a thermal blanket, leaving only the burned leg exposed for continued treatment. "The genome," she said suddenly. "Elena, if you can sequence the genome, that's the proof. That's what makes this irrefutable and puts ethical obligations on any further research." Elena nodded slowly. The blood samples sat in cold storage, waiting. With modern sequencing technology, she could have preliminary results in days, full genome in weeks. And if that genome showed what she suspected, "It'll change everything," she said. "It already has," Reeves replied. The rumble of vehicles outside announced the arrival of the federal team. Elena took a breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared to fight for a person she'd known for less than 3 hours. A person whose true name she didn't know, whose language she didn't speak, but whose right to exist on their own terms she would defend with everything she had. The examination room door opened. Men in federal wildlife uniforms entered, followed by a woman in a suit carrying a tablet, some kind of department supervisor. Elena recognized the type. Bureaucrats who saw wildlife as inventory, as resources to be managed or problems to be solved. "Dr. Vasquez?" The woman extended her hand. "I'm Director Sarah Chen, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We received reports of an unusual large mammal specimen. I understand you've been conducting a preliminary examination?" Elena shook her hand firmly. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, Comparative Anatomy and Primate Evolution. And yes, though unusual is an understatement. Director Chen, you're looking at what appears to be an unknown hominin species, not a great ape, a member of the human lineage, diverged from our ancestors somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago based on preliminary morphological assessment." Chen's expression didn't change. "That's an extraordinary claim, with extraordinary evidence." Elena gestured to her documented measurements, the X-rays displayed on the laptop. Bipedal locomotion, cranial capacity comparable to modern humans, hand structure capable of precision grip and tool use. This individual demonstrated intentional communication and self-awareness during a brief conscious period. One of the wildlife officers moved closer to the examination table. "Jesus, look at the size of it." "Him or her," Elena corrected sharply. "Not it. This is a person under any meaningful definition." Chen's eyes narrowed. "Doctor, I appreciate your scientific excitement, but let's maintain perspective. Until we have genetic confirmation, this is an unidentified species. It will be transported to our research facility in Portland for comprehensive study." "No." The word came out harder than Elena intended. She softened her tone, but not her position. "Director Chen, this individual is critically injured and just stabilized. Transportation right now could be fatal. More importantly, if this is indeed a relict hominin population, and I'm confident it is, then we're dealing with the most endangered species on Earth. Likely fewer than 100 individuals, possibly fewer than 50, surviving undetected in remote wilderness. Our actions in the next few hours could determine whether this species survives or goes extinct, which is precisely why we need comprehensive study in a controlled environment," Chen countered. Elena pulled up the X-rays of the hands. "Look at these phalanges, the thumb articulation. This person can manipulate objects with human-level dexterity. Now look at the cranial capacity, 1/800 cubic centimeters. That's larger than the modern human average. This isn't a curiosity, Director. This is a thinking, feeling individual with a culture, a language, maybe art and ritual. Taking them captive violates every ethical guideline we have for research with sentient beings." "We don't have ethical guidelines for unknown species," Chen said flatly. "Then we use the guidelines for humans," Eleanor shot back, "because that's what this is. A different branch of humanity that survived when all other hominin species went extinct. Homo sapiens killed off the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, Homo erectus. Do we really want to be responsible for finishing the job?" The room fell silent. Even the wildlife officers looked uncomfortable. Reeves stepped forward. "Director Chen, I'm the veterinarian of record. This patient is in no condition for transport. I recommend a minimum 72-hour observation period here at the Wildlife Center, with specialists on site for monitoring. Dr. Vasquez has already collected samples for genetic analysis. We can establish species identification definitively within a week." Chen studied them both, clearly calculating. "Fine. 72 hours under federal custody. But this facility is now under restricted access. No one in or out without my authorization." She turned to Elena. "Doctor, I want those genetic samples processed through official channels. The FBI has a forensics lab that can—" "No!" Elena kept her voice level. "With respect, Director, I'll be processing the samples through my university lab using established paleogenetic protocols. This requires specialized knowledge of ancient and divergent hominin DNA. I'll copy fish and wildlife on all results, but the analysis stays with qualified experts." It was a gamble. Chen could pull rank, could seize the samples, could shut Elena out entirely, but she'd also have to explain to her superiors why she'd removed a potentially groundbreaking hominin specimen from an expert's care without cause. After a long moment, Chen nodded curtly. "You have 1 week. I want preliminary genetic data on my desk. And doctor, if you're wrong, if this turns out to be a hoax or a deformed bear, your career is over." "If I'm right," Elena replied quietly, "none of our careers will matter compared to what this means." Chen left with her team, though 2 officers remained stationed outside the building. Federal custody, indeed, but Elena had bought time. Time to sequence a genome, time to understand what they'd found, time to figure out how to protect a species that had survived in secrecy for millennia. As the door closed, the creature stirred again. Those dark eyes opened, tracked the room, settled on Elena. There was a question in that gaze. Am I safe? Elena moved closer, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. She placed her hand gently on the edge of the table, palm up, an offering of trust. The creature studied her hand. Then, with deliberate care, it extended 1 finger and touched her palm. The contact lasted only a second, but the meaning was clear. A pact. Tentative, fragile, but real. "I'll protect you," Elena whispered, knowing the words meant nothing to this individual but needing to say them anyway. "I promise. We'll figure this out together." She had 1 week to decode a genome that could rewrite human history. 1 week to prove that humanity wasn't alone in the human family tree. 1 week to find a way to save a species that had hidden successfully for 1,000,000 years. Elena looked at the blood samples waiting in cold storage, thought of the sequencing equipment at her university lab, calculated the processing time and analysis required. Then she got to work. The genome sequencing began on day 2 of federal observation. Elena worked through the night in her university lab, a converted warehouse space filled with thermal cyclers, sequencing machines, and banks of computers that hummed with processing power. Her graduate assistant, Marcus, a sharp-eyed bioinformatics specialist, had asked no questions when she'd arrived with the samples at midnight. He'd simply looked at her face and said, "How urgent. Civilization-altering urgent." Now, 72 hours into the work, preliminary results scrolled across her monitor in strings of nucleotide codes that told a story older than cities, older than agriculture, older than everything humans thought they knew about themselves. "Elena," Marcus's voice cut through her concentration. "You need to see this." She rolled her chair to his workstation. On his screen, a phylogenetic tree branched like a river delta, showing genetic relationships between species. Modern humans occupied 1 branch. Neanderthals and Denisovans, extinct hominin cousins, occupied neighboring branches, close enough to interbreed with Homo sapiens millennia ago, and there, diverging from a common ancestor approximately 3 million years ago, was a 3rd branch, the specimen from Gifford Pinchot. "It's real," Marcus breathed. "This isn't contamination, isn't a sequencing error. This is a legitimate hominin lineage that split from our ancestors during the early Pleistocene." Elena's hands trembled as she pulled up the detail analysis. The genome was 98.9% identical to modern humans, more distant than Neanderthals at 99.7%, but far closer than chimpanzees at 98.4%. Crucially, there were signs of ancient gene flow in both directions. This species and Homo sapiens had interbred, probably multiple times across tens of thousands of years. "Look at chromosome 2, Marcus said, highlighting a section. "They have the same fusion we do, where 2 ancestral ape chromosomes merged into 1. That fusion happened after we split from chimpanzees, but before the Neanderthal divergence. This species has it too, which confirms they're part of the hominin lineage post-chimp split." Eleanor scanned through the functional genes. FOXP2, associated with language capability, showed fascinating variations, different from modern humans but equally complex, suggesting full linguistic ability through a different evolutionary path. HAR1, a human-accelerated region involved in cortical development, was present with unique modifications. This species had evolved its own solutions to the challenges of intelligence. "The brain development genes are incredible," she murmured. "They've got larger olfactory bulbs, enhanced visual processing in low-light conditions, and what looks like increased capacity for spatial memory, adaptations for forest living." Marcus pulled up another file. "And check this out. Cold tolerance genes. They've got variants similar to Denisovans and Inuit populations, but independently evolved. Plus tissue repair mechanisms that are off the charts. This species heals fast." The picture emerging was of a hominin lineage that had diverged from the human line while our ancestors still lived in Africa, then migrated separately, perhaps to Asia initially, then across Beringia into North America during one of the glacial periods when sea levels dropped. While Homo sapiens spread across Europe and Asia, encountering and absorbing Neanderthals and Denisovans, this other branch of humanity had come east, had survived the megafauna extinctions, the climate upheavals, the arrival of anatomically modern humans from Siberia roughly 15,000 years ago, had watched, perhaps, as these new humans, their distant cousins, built civilizations and forgot that other kinds of people existed. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Reeves. "He's awake and alert. Burns healing remarkably fast. Trying to sit up. Think you should come." She saved her work, copied the files to an encrypted drive, and headed for her car. Dawn was breaking over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The city was waking. Morning commuters, coffee shops opening, the ordinary rhythm of human life. None of them knew that everything had changed, that the definition of human had just expanded. The drive to Gifford Pinchot took 2 hours. Elena used the time to organize her thoughts, to prepare for what came next. She had the genomic proof, had the phylogenetic trees, had the evidence that would force scientific journals to accept what they'd found. But evidence wasn't enough. She needed communication, needed to establish not just that this species existed, but that they were people with rights, with agency, with the capacity for consent. The Wildlife Center appeared unchanged from outside. A brown building among brown trees, smoke-hazed morning light filtering through the canopy. But inside, everything was different. The patient sat upright on the examination table, massive frame hunched slightly, bandaged leg extended carefully. But it was the eyes that struck Elena, fully alert, intensely focused, tracking every movement in the room. Reeves stood a respectful distance away, holding a tray with fruit, nuts, and vegetables. "He won't eat," Reeves said quietly. "Not while we're watching, but the food disappears when we leave. The burns are healing incredibly fast. We're seeing granulation tissue that would normally take 2 weeks appearing in 3 days. And he's been drawing." Elena saw it then. Scratches on a metal tray, deliberate patterns etched with a fingernail. Geometric shapes, a wavy line that could represent water or mountains. And something that looked distinctly like a human figure next to a larger figure. Her throat tightened. "Have you tried to communicate?" "Basic gestures. He understands pointing, seems to track our intentions. When I showed him a picture of a forest on my phone, he touched it and vocalized, a kind of low humming." Reeves hesitated. "Elena, I think he's trying to tell us something important." Elena approached slowly, keeping her body language open and non-threatening. She touched her chest as she had before. "Elena." The patient watched her intently. Then he touched his own chest and made a sound, a deep, resonant vocalization that combined humming with a sharp exhalation. It was complex, layered with harmonics human vocal cords couldn't replicate. "That's his name," Elena said, wonder filling her voice. She tried to imitate the sound, failed, tried again. Got close enough that the patient's eyes widened slightly, recognition or amusement she couldn't tell. She needed a system, needed a way to bridge the communication gap. Elena pulled out her tablet, opened a drawing app, and sketched quickly a simple stick figure. She held it up, then pointed at herself, drew another figure, larger, pointed at him. The patient leaned forward, studying the tablet with intense curiosity. His large hand moved hesitantly, then with confidence, taking the stylus. His drawing was crude. The fingers were designed for power, not fine motor control, but unmistakable. He sketched several large figures in a cluster, then many smaller human-like figures surrounding them. A population map. Elena's pulse quickened. She zoomed in on the cluster of large figures, pointed at them, then at him, raised her eyebrows in question. He nodded, a human gesture, probably learned from observation. Then he drew a line separating the two groups, his people and humans. The line was thick, emphasized. Boundaries. "You want to stay separate," Elena said softly. He couldn't understand her words, but her tone conveyed the gravity. He met her eyes and nodded again, more emphatically. Over the next 4 hours, they built a vocabulary. Elena sketched symbols and objects. The patient responded with drawings and gestures. Forest, multiple tree symbols. Water, wavy lines. Food, gathering motion. Danger, sharp gesture, cutting across. The patient was a quick study, grasping abstract concepts with startling speed. He drew a circle of large figures, family, tribe, then touched his chest and pointed to the circle. He belonged to a group. Elena drew a question mark next to the circle. Where? The patient's expression changed, something that might have been distress. He drew mountains, rivers, forests, a large territory. Then he drew human symbols spreading, encroaching, drawn with harder strokes, almost violent. The large figures retreating, space shrinking. A history of displacement, of losing ground. Elena felt the weight of it. 10,000 years of hiding, watching human populations explode across the continent, forests fall to agriculture and cities, wilderness shrink to isolated pockets. This species had survived by becoming ghosts. The patient drew more, a sequence that looked like different seasons. He pointed to the burn on his leg, then drew symbols that might represent fire. Drew himself, separated from the circle of figures, lost or left behind in the evacuation. "You got cut off from your people during the wildfire," Elena said. "They had to move fast." He seemed to understand her concerned tone. Drew an arrow pointing from his figure back toward the circle, a desire to return. But then he drew something else, small human figures with what might be tools or weapons, moving toward the mountain area, drawn with the same harsh strokes as before. A warning. Elena's blood ran cold. "People are looking for you, searching the burn areas." The patient tapped the drawing emphatically. Yes, Reeves had been watching quietly. The fire made them visible, destroyed the cover they've maintained for centuries. If anyone's analyzing the evacuation patterns, the wildlife migration routes, they'll find them, Elena finished. A population that survived by being invisible is suddenly exposed. The patient drew more frantically now, the circle of large figures moving, arrows showing direction away from the human searchers. Then he drew himself, still separated. The gap between his figure and the circle growing. He was running out of time. His people were moving to new territory, and if he couldn't rejoin them soon, he'd be permanently cut off. Elena made a decision. She sketched rapidly the building they were in, then a vehicle, then the patient. A transportation sequence. She pointed to the mountains, where his people were, raised her eyebrows in question. Could she take him home? The patient stared at her drawing. Then, very carefully, he took the stylus and drew a line connecting her figure to himself, then to the circle of his people. An introduction, a bridge. He was offering to show her, to take her to them. "Oh, God," Reeves whispered. "Elena, do you understand what he's suggesting?" Elena did. She would be the first modern human to make contact with a hidden population that had every reason to fear and hate her species. She would be stepping outside every protocol, every safety regulation, every scientific standard. She would be trusting her life to a person she'd known for days, from a species she'd just proven existed. "Yes," she said, "I understand." The patient drew more carefully now, a specific sequence of symbols that looked like landmarks. Tree with a split trunk, rock formation that might be a cliff face, stream junction, a map to his people's current location. Elena photographed every drawing, committing them to memory. The federal observers would be back tomorrow for their scheduled check. She had perhaps 16 hours to decide if she was really going to do this. She looked at the patient, at the intelligence in his eyes, the desperation, the hope. This person had been alone for days, injured, trapped in a human facility. His people were on the move, probably terrified that humans had finally found them. And Elena held the genomic evidence that could either protect them or destroy them, depending on how it was used. "We need supplies," she said to Reeves. "Medical kit, food, water, a GPS unit with those landmarks marked. And we need a way to get him out of here without the federal guards noticing." Reeves looked torn. "Elena, this is insane. You could die out there. We have no idea what their population is like, how they'll react to you. That's why it has to be me." Elena touched the tablet, where the patient's drawings showed a line connecting her to his people. "He's offering safe passage. That's a gift, Reeves, a chance to make first contact on ethical terms instead of as captor and captive." The patient watched their exchange, clearly sensing the tension. He drew again, Elena's figure standing with the circle of large figures, all alive, a promise. "I'll bring her back," Elena told Reeves, even though the patient couldn't understand. "We'll document everything ethically, establish a communication protocol, and give them the choice about what happens next. That's more than any other hominin species got from us." Reeves closed her eyes briefly. "You're absolutely certifiably insane." "Probably. I'll need 3 hours to prep supplies and create a distraction for the guards." Reeves met Elena's eyes. "But when Director Chen finds out we're both finished, then let's make it count." They worked through the afternoon, planning an escape that would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high. The patient's burns were healed enough for travel. The accelerated healing was remarkable, confirming what the genome had suggested. Elena packed her research notes, the genomic data, cameras for documentation. She packed climbing gear, camping supplies, enough food for a week. Either she'd be back in days, or this would be the most significant anthropological expedition in human history. At 11 p.m., Reeves triggered the fire alarm at the ranger station a quarter-mile away. While the federal guards investigated, Elena and the patient slipped out through a service door. He moved through the darkness with astonishing silence for his size, a shadow among shadows. Elena followed, her night vision poor compared to his, but adequate with moonlight. They reached her truck in the parking area. The patient paused, studying the vehicle with clear apprehension. He'd probably seen vehicles before. This species couldn't have stayed completely hidden without observing humans extensively, but riding in one was different. "It's safe," Elena whispered. "It'll take us closer to your people." He looked at her, some decision crystallizing. Then he carefully folded his massive frame into the passenger seat, a gesture of trust that made Elena's throat tighten. She drove north into the Cascades, away from settlements, following logging roads that degraded into trails. The patient watched everything, the speedometer, the headlights, the GPS display. Learning, always learning. 3 hours later, they abandoned the truck where the road ended. The patient gestured forward into wilderness. Elena shouldered her pack, checked her supplies one last time, and followed him into the darkness. They walked through what remained of the night. The patient moved with confident efficiency through terrain that would have taken Elena hours to navigate. He used game trails invisible to her eyes, found passages through dense undergrowth, crossed streams at natural fords. This was his world, his territory. She was the alien here. Dawn found them 20 miles from the nearest road, deep in old-growth forest that had never seen a chainsaw. The patient stopped at a massive cedar tree, its trunk 10 feet across, its canopy disappearing into mist. He touched the bark, a gesture that seemed reverent, then made the resonant humming vocalization that was his name. The forest answered. From multiple directions, calls echoed through the trees. Deep, harmonic vocalizations that carried meaning in their patterns. The patient responded, a complex sequence of sounds. Elena couldn't parse the structure, but she heard the emotional content. Relief, joy, reunion. Figures emerged from the forest. 5 adults, 2 juveniles. They approached cautiously, their movements coordinated like a hunting pack. The family surrounded the patient, touching him, checking his injury, vocalizing in rapid sequences that were clearly language. Then they noticed Elena. The mood shifted instantly. The adults moved between her and the juveniles, protective stances. One large male, bigger even than her patient, stepped forward. His posture was aggressive, challenging. Elena's heart hammered. She kept her hands visible, palms out, non-threatening. The patient intervened, stepping between Elena and the large male. He vocalized rapidly, gesturing between them, showing the drawings on Elena's tablet, still clutched in her hand, explaining something. The male studied the drawings, looked at Elena with sharp intelligence. Then he made a decision. He vocalized once, sharp and commanding. The family relaxed slightly, though they kept their distance. The patient turned to Elena, gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself carefully to the ground, removing her pack, showing she wasn't a threat. For the next several hours, Elena sat in the clearing while the family observed her. They communicated in their language. The vocalizations were too complex for her to fully parse, but she recorded everything, her mind already analyzing the phonemic structure. They showed remarkable curiosity, examining her equipment with careful hands, smelling her food supplies, touching the fabric of her jacket. The juveniles were braver, approaching closer. One, probably equivalent to a human 10-year-old, studied Elena's face intently, reached out and touched her hair, so different from their coarse body covering. Elena held very still, letting the examination happen. The family's material culture was minimal but sophisticated. They wore no clothing but used woven grass carrying pouches. One adult had a necklace of carved wooden beads, art, ornamentation, symbolic thought. They carried no visible tools, but Elena noticed hand calluses suggesting regular tool use. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the large male approached with a flat piece of bark and a piece of charcoal. He handed them to Elena, an invitation. She understood. They'd been communicating through her drawings. Now they wanted to share their own. The male drew with surprising delicacy, a map showing mountain ranges, river valleys, forest areas. He marked several locations with circles. Then he drew human settlements at the periphery, growing larger over a sequence of images. Time-lapse displacement. Elena added to the drawing human population numbers, written as numerals he couldn't read, but whose quantity was clear. Millions, billions. The male's eyes widened. She drew more, vehicles, cities, aircraft passing overhead. The technology and scale of human civilization. The male shared the drawings with his family. Their vocalizations took on a somber tone. She understood what they were asking. How do we survive when you are so many and we are so few? Elena drew carefully. A new image showing large figures and small figures separated but both alive. Both with territory. A coexistence model. The male studied it, then he drew something that broke Elena's heart, a sequence showing mixed figures, hybrids. He pointed to himself, then to Elena. His meaning was clear. We are related. We were one people once. She nodded. Drew the phylogenetic tree from memory, showing the divergence 1.3 million years ago. Then the reconnections, periods where the two species interbred. Proof of kinship. The male touched the drawing where the branches connected, made a sound of recognition. They had their own stories, Elena realized, their own oral history of encounters with the others, with humans. As night fell, the family built a fire using friction methods, sophisticated fire starting that required skill and knowledge. They shared food, roots, nuts, dried meat that might have been deer or elk. The juveniles showed Elena their own drawings, scratched in dirt, images of animals, trees, the mountain they called home. It was culture, it was art, it was everything that mattered. Around the fire, watching this family that had welcomed her despite every reason for caution, Elena understood the magnitude of what she'd been given. A chance to know them not as specimens, but as people. A chance to establish first contact with dignity instead of dominance. The patient, she needed to find a name she could pronounce, sat beside her. He drew one more image, Elena returning to her world. Then a symbol she interpreted as time. Then Elena returning to the forest, to them, a request, an alliance. Come back, he was saying. Be the bridge between your people and mine. Elena drew her answer. Yes. She spent 5 days with the family, learning their communication systems, documenting their material culture, establishing the basics of a pidgin language using gestures, drawings, and simplified vocalizations. She learned that they called themselves something that translated roughly as the old people, or those who came before. No, they had stories stretching back generations, oral histories of the time before humans arrived in numbers, when their population was larger, when they lived more openly. They numbered about 40 individuals in this extended family group. The male told her through painstaking communication. There were 2 other groups they knew of, maybe 60 more people total, fewer than 100 individuals remaining. A species on the edge of extinction, not from predators or disease, but from simple lack of space. Elena documented everything, careful photographs with permission, audio recordings of their language, video of their daily activities. Evidence collected ethically with consent, showing people living as they chose to live. On the 6th day, she prepared to leave. The male presented her with a gift, a carved wooden token, small enough to fit in her palm, depicting 2 figures side by side. She understood the symbolism, partnership. The patient, she'd started thinking of him as Raven for the intelligence in his eyes, walked with her part of the way back. At the edge of their territory, he stopped, drew one final image. Humans searching, human symbols with weapons, moving toward the mountain areas where his people lived. The danger was real. The wildfires had drawn attention. Researchers would be combing the burn areas, looking for any signs of unusual wildlife. Federal agencies would be investigating the escaped specimen from the Wildlife Center. The window for keeping his people hidden was closing. Raven touched the carved token Elena carried, then touched his chest. The message was clear. Protect us. I will, Elena promised. I'll find a way. She hiked alone back to her truck, her mind racing with plans. She had the genomic evidence, had the documentation, had first-hand experience of a thinking, feeling culture that deserved to exist on its own terms. Now she had to figure out how to save them without destroying them in the process. The answer, she realized as she drove back toward civilization, lay not in revealing everything, but in revealing just enough. Proof that they existed, proof that they were people, but carefully controlled proof that didn't include locations, population numbers, or anything that would help someone find them. She would publish the genome, would present the morphological data, would show the world that humanity wasn't alone in the human family tree, but the family by the cedar tree, the juveniles who'd drawn pictures in the dirt, Raven with his gift of trust. They would remain ghosts, protected by the very secrecy that had kept them alive for millennia. It would be the most important discovery in anthropology published with deliberate gaps in data. It would be science in service of ethics. It would be enough. The scientific world detonated 3 weeks later when Elena published the genome in Nature Genetics with a companion paper in American Journal of Physical Anthropology. The headlines were apocalyptic in their enthusiasm. Unknown human species discovered in North America. Living fossil rewrites human evolution. The Bigfoot genome is real. Elena sat in her university office, ignoring the 17 interview requests blinking on her voicemail, and stared at the carefully worded conclusions of her paper. Tissue samples obtained from a living individual during emergency wildlife medical intervention reveal a hominin lineage divergent from Homo sapiens approximately 1.3 million years BP. Morphological and genetic data suggest a cryptic, low-density population surviving in remote wilderness areas. Further research must prioritize in situ conservation and non-invasive study methods to prevent population disturbance. What the paper didn't say, where the individual was found, beyond Pacific Northwest wilderness, what the population density actually was, where they currently lived. The paper was a masterclass in strategic omission, enough data to prove the discovery, insufficient detail to enable exploitation. The scientific community's response was predictable chaos. Half the primatologists in North America were demanding access to the specimen. The other half were calling her data fabricated. Conspiracy theorists emerged from every corner claiming vindication. Indigenous groups issued statements ranging from "We've been saying this for centuries" to "Stop disrupting sacred sites with your research." And the federal government was predictably furious. "Dr. Vasquez, you released protected samples without authorization." Director Chen's face on the video call was impressively controlled, given that Elena had just ended her career. "You violated federal custody agreements, compromised an ongoing investigation, and published sensitive data that could impact national security." National security. Elena kept her voice level. "Director Chen, I discovered a previously unknown human species. The genome is scientific heritage belonging to all humanity. I followed proper protocols for paleogenetic publication. You released the individual from federal custody. The individual left of their own volition. I documented that they possessed cognitive capacity sufficient for autonomous decision-making. Under those circumstances, continued detention would constitute false imprisonment of a person." Chen's jaw tightened. "We searched the burn areas based on your published data. We found no evidence of any population." "Good." Elena met her gaze steadily. "That suggests they're successfully evading detection, which means conservation efforts are working." "This isn't over, Doctor." The call ended. Elena knew Chen was right. There would be investigations, possibly legal charges for violating the federal custody order. But she'd consulted with 3 different lawyers before publishing. The legal ground was murky. Could you be charged with releasing a specimen if that specimen was actually a person? Did fish and wildlife have authority over hominin species? The questions were unprecedented. Her university surprisingly stood behind her. The press was too good, the scientific acclaim too valuable. They'd issued a statement supporting Dr. Vasquez's groundbreaking discovery and her ethical approach to conservation of a critically endangered species. Academic politics made strange bedfellows. Marcus knocked on her office door carrying a tablet. "You're going to want to see this." He pulled up a preprint paper submitted to Molecular Biology and Evolution. Ancient gene flow between Homo sapiens and undiscovered hominin in North America. The authors had analyzed public genomic databases and found traces, tiny fragments, in the DNA of some indigenous populations. Evidence of interbreeding within the last 10,000 years. "They're not completely isolated," Marcus said. "There's been occasional genetic exchange, probably rare encounters where individuals from both populations had children together," Elena finished. "Which means Raven's people have living descendants in modern human populations, genetic relatives. More than that, it means legally they might have standing. If modern people carry their DNA, you could argue for protection under existing human rights frameworks." Elena stared at the data. This changed everything. This meant the family by the cedar tree wasn't just a curiosity or an endangered species. They were relatives to thousands of living people who had never known they carried genes from another human lineage. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, then something made her answer. "Dr. Vasquez?" A woman's voice, older, authoritative. "My name is Dr. Margaret Longfeather. I'm a geneticist with the Native American Genetics Council. I'm calling about your published genome." Elena's pulse quickened. "Dr. Longfeather, I'm honored. I'll be direct. My own DNA shows matches to the fragments your discovery explains. So do 7 other members of my family. We want to know what you're doing to protect our relatives." Our relatives. The words hit Elena like a wave. "Everything I can," she said honestly. "But I'm one researcher fighting federal agencies and every curiosity seeker with a camera. I need help." "Then you have it. The Council is issuing a statement today declaring these people as relatives of indigenous populations and demanding their territories be protected under existing treaty rights. We're also filing for immediate endangered species listing, not as animals, but as a distinct human population." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly. But we've had practice fighting for survival." Longfeather paused. "I'd like to meet them, not for research. Just to know they're real, to tell them they're not alone. I'll do everything I can to make that possible," Elena promised. "But it has to be on their terms." The political firestorm intensified over the following weeks. Conservationists demanded immediate habitat protection. Hunters claimed the discoveries were hoaxes designed to shut down forest access. Cryptozoologists descended on the Pacific Northwest with everything from drones to thermal cameras. The Forest Service, caught in the middle, issued emergency restrictions on public access to several remote areas, ostensibly for wildfire recovery, actually to create buffer zones. Elena worked behind the scenes, coordinating with the Native American Genetics Council, environmental law groups, and sympathetic scientists. They built a legal framework arguing for protected status under a combination of endangered species law, human rights conventions, and indigenous treaty rights. It was unprecedented, messy, and their only chance. 3 months after publication, Eleanor received a call from Reeves. "You need to come to the Wildlife Center now." She made the drive in record time, her mind spinning through possibilities. When she arrived, Reeves met her at the door with an expression somewhere between shock and delight. He came back. "Raven, he's here." Eleanor's heart leaped. She entered the examination room and froze. Raven sat calmly on the examination table, but he wasn't alone. The large male from the family was with him, and a third individual, an older female with streaks of grey in her russet hair. All 3 watched Elena with the same intense intelligence she remembered. "They walked right in 2 hours ago," Reeves said quietly. "Waited by the door until I opened it. I think they're here to negotiate." Eleanor approached slowly. "Raven, you came back." He gestured to the tablet on the table, the same one Elena had left with him, a gift. On the screen was a carefully crafted message, a combination of pictures and simple symbols they'd developed together. The message was clear. The family wanted to talk, wanted to establish formal communication, wanted to be part of the decisions about their future. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened a new drawing on the tablet. She sketched carefully, human figures in a room, large figures in the forest, with symbols representing communication between them, a framework for dialogue. The older female took the stylus. She drew with careful precision, boundaries around forest areas, marked with strong lines, no humans entering. Then she drew a smaller area, marked differently, where human and large figures met, a contact zone. "You want protected territory, but you're willing to have a designated meeting area," Elena interpreted. "Controlled contact on your terms." The female nodded. She drew more, symbols representing different seasons, showing that meetings could happen at specific times. Not constant surveillance, but regular check-ins, partnership, not subjugation. The large male added his own drawing, human symbols carrying supplies, food, medicine, tools. He drew large figures offering knowledge in return, images of plants, animals, landscape features, an exchange of information. They were proposing an alliance. Over the next 6 hours, they built a framework for coexistence. Eleanor sketched legal protection structures. The male drew territorial boundaries. The female illustrated cultural protocols about what could be shared and what must remain private. It was anthropology in reverse. The studied population helping establish the study parameters. Elena explained, through painstaking visual communication, what publication of the genome meant. That many humans now knew they existed, that this brought both danger and potential protection, that some humans wanted to capture them, study them, but others. She drew symbols representing the Native American Genetics Council, conservation groups, wanted to help protect them. The female listened, then drew a significant image, large figures hiding in smaller and smaller spaces, eventually having nowhere left to go. Then she drew a different scenario, large and small figures sharing the landscape with maintained boundaries, but coexistence. "You understand this is your only chance for survival," Elena said softly. "Complete hiding isn't sustainable anymore. Too many humans, too much technology, but controlled contact, legal protection." Thus, the female drew one more image that broke Elena's heart. Young, large figures, juveniles, existing in a world with space to live, a future. That was what they were fighting for. Not just survival, but a future where their children could exist without constant terror of discovery. "I'll fight for that," Elena promised. "We'll build something new. Ethical coexistence. It won't be perfect, but it can work." The male touched the carved token he'd given Elena months before, which she wore on a cord around her neck. Then he drew a new image, more tokens, distributed to multiple human figures, selected people, trusted intermediaries. "You want to choose who has access," Elena said. "Who can enter your territory, who can communicate with you, consent-based research." All three nodded emphatically. They worked until dusk, building a protocol that would later be formalized as the Cascade Accords, the first formal agreement between Homo sapiens and another human species. The Accords established protected territories in designated wilderness areas legally closed to human entry except by explicit invitation. A small group of approved researchers and cultural liaisons who could request meetings at seasonal intervals. Medical support available on request, with care provided in the field rather than removing individuals to facilities. Cultural exchange programs allowing both species to learn from each other while respecting boundaries. Legal recognition of the population as a distinct human group with full rights to self-determination. Strict confidentiality regarding population numbers, specific locations, and cultural practices marked as private. It was imperfect, would require constant negotiation, would face legal challenges and political opposition, but it was a start. As the three visitors prepared to leave, the female approached Eleanor directly. She touched Eleanor's face gently, the same gesture the juvenile had made months before, and vocalized softly. The tone was unmistakable. Gratitude. Elena touched the female's hand in return. "Thank you for trusting me." Raven drew one final image before they left. Elena standing at the boundary of the forest, with a path leading both into the human world and into the wilderness. A bridge, permanently maintained. He touched his chest, then touched Elena's chest. The message was clear. We are connected now, both sides. They disappeared into the darkness with the same silent efficiency Elena remembered. But this time, she knew she would see them again. The secrecy would continue, had to continue, but the complete isolation was over. They would have allies now, protectors, a fighting chance. The Cascade Accords were ratified 6 months later, after intense legal battles and political maneuvering. The designated territories were formally protected under a combination of endangered species law, human rights conventions, and expanded interpretations of indigenous treaty protections. It wasn't perfect, There were loopholes, underfunded enforcement, ongoing challenges from logging and development interests. But it held. Elena became the primary liaison, approved by both the family and the oversight committee that managed the accords. She made quarterly trips into the wilderness, carrying medical supplies, updated information about legal protections, and messages from Dr. Longfeather and other indigenous geneticists who'd found evidence of shared ancestry. On her fourth visit, the family showed Elena something she'd never seen: their burial grounds, stone cairns marking generations, some clearly centuries old. Art carved into rock faces showing the history of their people, stories preserved in symbol and image. They were teaching her their history, trusting her with memory. The juveniles she'd met now approached without fear, eager to examine her equipment, practice their pidgin communication, show off their own skills at tracking, plant identification, and the 1,000 subtle forms of forest knowledge their culture maintained. They were children, she realized. Children who would grow up in a world where they weren't completely alone, where they knew there were humans who recognized them as people. Raven's mate, Elena finally understood the relationship when she saw them together, was pregnant. The first birth Elena would document, the first time modern medical support would be available if complications arose. The responsibility was crushing and exhilarating in equal measure. "What do you call them?" Marcus asked once, during a lab meeting where Eleanor shared carefully redacted findings. "We can't keep saying the species. They need a formal taxonomic name." Eleanor thought about it. Thought about the family by the cedar tree, about Raven's intelligence and courage, about the female elder's wisdom. Thought about a people who had survived 1,000,000 years of climatic changes, geographic upheavals, and finally the arrival of their most dangerous relative. "Homo silvestris," she said finally. "The forest people. It's descriptive, acknowledges their humanity, and doesn't impose our cultural interpretations on them." The name was officially adopted 3 months later. Homo silvestris, sister species to Homo sapiens, diverged 1.3 million years ago, rediscovered in the Cascade Mountains in 2024. Population estimated between 80 and 120 individuals across 3 known family groups. Status: critically endangered. Protection: maximum legal safeguards under both species conservation and human rights frameworks. The paper trail, the legal documents, the scientific publications, all carefully constructed to prove they existed while protecting where they were. 5 years after first contact, Elena stood at the edge of the forest on a clear October morning, waiting at the designated meeting spot. Raven emerged from the trees, no longer alone. His child, nearly 3 years old, healthy and vibrant, walked beside him, one hand clutching his massive fingers. The child saw Elena and paused, curious but cautious. Raven vocalized softly, reassuring. Then he guided the child forward. Elena crouched down, making herself smaller, non-threatening. The child approached, studying her with the same intense intelligence as all of Raven's people, reached out and touched Eleanor's hand with tiny fingers. Contact, trust, a new generation that would grow up knowing humans could be allies, not just threats. Raven drew in the dirt, a new proposal. The family wanted to establish a cultural exchange, would teach selected humans their knowledge of the forest ecosystem in exchange for medical knowledge, tool-making techniques, and information about the changing climate. Partnership built on mutual benefit. "Yes," Elena said. "Absolutely yes." They worked through the morning, building the framework for this new collaboration. Other humans would be invited. Dr. Longfeather had specifically requested to meet her relatives. Ecological researchers who could help the family understand and adapt to climate change. Medical professionals who could provide care during emergencies. All approved by the family, all operating under their protocols. All remembering that this was their land, their culture, their choice. As Elena prepared to leave, she looked at the child playing near Raven, at the forest stretching beyond them into protected wilderness, at the carved token she wore marking her as a trusted ally. This wasn't the ending she'd imagined 5 years ago when she'd gotten that middle-of-the-night call. She'd thought she was going to document an impossible specimen. Instead, she'd become part of something far more important, proof that humanity could learn from its past mistakes. Homo sapiens had driven the Neanderthals to extinction, had absorbed or eliminated every other human species we'd encountered. But Homo silvestris would survive, not by remaining completely hidden, but by building alliances, asserting their rights, and finding humans willing to fight alongside them for their continued existence. The story would never be fully public. Most people would read about credible evidence of an unknown primate species in North America without knowing the full truth. The locations would remain secret, the population numbers vague, the cultural details protected, but the family knew. Dr. Longfeather knew, the small network of researchers and liaisons knew, and in knowing, they carried the responsibility of guardianship. Elena watched Raven and his child disappear into the forest, heading home to their family. She turned and walked back toward civilization, carrying new drawings, new data, new stories that would be carefully edited before sharing. She touched the carved token at her throat, 2 figures side by side. Partnership, alliance, hope. They had survived 1,000,000 years. With careful effort and ethical commitment, they might survive 1,000,000 more. That was worth fighting for. Ready to explore more stories of discovery, ethics, and hidden worlds? Subscribe and join our community of thoughtful readers who crave narratives that challenge our understanding of humanity itself. More untold stories await.